פשוט מבלבל את המוח. איך הבן אדם יכול היה לעשות את זה? מה אני אומר בזה? אני רוצה להגיד בזה דברים שאני חושב שפרופסור נוי גם כן אמר. אז אני אתחיל איתה. When Dorit Barnea asked me if I would be willing to write and participate in this morning in memoriam of Professor Pinchas Noy, my first reaction was of surprise and a cautious, let me think about it, for it seemed that these shoes would be too big for me. I never met Pinchas Noy, and reading the list of his papers, I felt it could be too daring to cope with such a task. It took me some days to reflect on Dorit's invitation and a second call from her to make up my mind. The first time I heard about Dr. Pinchas Noy was from Dr. Maria Alzira Perestrello during my first psychoanalytical supervision more than 40 years ago. Dr. Perestrello, herself a poet, knowing about my connections to Israel and to music, asked me if I knew Dr. Noy, whom she admired, probably from his paper on art and creativity. By then, I knew nothing about him. Dorit's invitation suddenly seemed to offer me a kind of circle of closures, Sgirat Ma'agalim, more than 40 years after my initial indirect encounter with Pinchas Noy. והסגירת המעגלים האלה, אני לא כתבתי, אבל אני אוסיף פה מהצד, שאחרי שאני הייתי איזה 5 או 6 שנים באנליזה עם האנליטיקאי המנחה שלי, בריו, פתאום הלכתי לקונצרט גיטרות ב-Brazilian Association, Glitter Association. מי אני רואה שם? האנליטיקאי שלי. מה הבן אדם הזה עושה פה? ואז שאלתי חבר שהוא היה נגן גיטרה, והוא אמר לי, זה פשקו. הוא הנשיא של ה-Brazilian Association for Guitar. ואז נודע לי שפשקו היה גיטריסט די מיומן, ושנים אחר כך, עוד סגירת מעגל, נודע לי שהוא היה באנליזה עם אנליטיקאי אנגלי שהובאו מאנגליה, דוקטור מרק בורק, שלשנים נודע לי שהוא ניגן כינור. אז זה באמת סוג של צירוף מקרים מעניין. In one of his last papers, Where Do Melodies Come From?, Pinchas Noy revealed his passion for music since his childhood and described his youth dream to become a composer, how he began to teach himself to play the piano. He struggled to develop his music skills in order to become a professional composer, until the moment in which he understood that he did not have the sufficient qualities to become a professional musician, and against the opinion of a conservatory director, decided to quit his dream. Nevertheless, his passion for music persisted, and he became a very enthusiastic, knowledgeable, and capable audiophile, as I could grasp from his paper. In his paper, Noy describes his disagreements with Freud concerning the lesser importance that Freud attributed to the conscious narrative in dreams interpretation, and criticized it for, in Noy's opinion, Freud's underestimation is unjustified. This idea will link with some of what I intend to convey in this talk. In his paper, apart from addressing some specific aspects related to music, Noy made a quite thorough examination of the process of creativity in general, linking it with unconscious sources and with many neuropsychophysiologic, neurochemical data and results from brain scan techniques. He developed ideas around the concepts of unconscious submental or automatic zombie functions and unconscious supramental functions, creativity and dreaming, suggesting the concept of different task forces in the brain functioning to provide the realization of these different tasks. My own connection to music and art began at home when I was approximately 4 years old. I began to learn to play the violin under the direct influence and stimulation of my father, Joseph Feldman. Since the beginning of my violin studies, I was told by him, the violin is only for pleasure, not for profession. After I began my psychoanalytic training, I kept the violin, both playing the violin, both at home and with professional groups. I continue to play the violin on almost a daily basis, and recently completed, after some 5 years, together with my wife, שהיא מוזיקאית מקצועית, מירנה הרצוג, and a friend, שהוא פיזיקאי, אבל קלידן מאוד בקיא, to play all the Haydn and Mozart trios for pianoforte, violin and cello on period instruments. And we will try to do Beethoven trios now. אני צריך להגיד שהיקום המוזיקלי הוא באמת יקום ענקי, ואני ואשתי, אנחנו שייכים למה שאפשר לקרוא ברוק פריקס. אנחנו חובבים מוזיקה ברוקית, קלאסית, גם מודרנית, אבל בייחוד בכלים עתיקים. Nevertheless, I never thought of taking music as a subject for psychoanalytic exploration or focused thought. It seemed to me that I felt that these were two distinct areas of my life that should be kept apart, as if not to spoil music with intellectual dwellings. For music was and should be kept as an almost exclusive experiential asset, as a practicing player or singer or a listener. Thus, I never felt too much interest for psychoanalytic papers on music, and whenever I read a paper on music or musicians, it seemed to me distant from the reality of the practicing composer, performer, or listener. Actually, I think that there are many possible analogies and convergence points between music as an art, be it as a practitioner or as a listener, and psychoanalysis, which many see more as an art than as a science, though in art there is science for sure. And music is a fair example, for in music one deals with psychic physics entities, vibrations that are perceived as tones as well as rhythm, time. For instance, tuning, apparently a very simple parameter, either you are in tune or you are out of tune, is a very complicated acoustic issue, having suffered variations according to time and place, with important consequences in music, writing, and performing. In music, as in psychoanalysis, one has to have a natural general potential, genetic, which is to be developed through years of learning, thinking, and doing, namely practicing experience. In both, one has to do with pitch, velocity of speech, the music of communication, and the text. One has to be in tune with the text, with the composer or patient's supposed intentions, with the fellow players or patient, to be attentive to the dynamics, forte, piano, of the musical or the patient's text. And last but not least, one has to know enough about the historical, genetical origins of the text, musical or discursive, in order to understand and correctly interpret וזאת היא מילה שמשתמשים במוזיקה כמו בפסיכואנליזה, to interpret the text, musical or discursive. From its beginning, psychoanalysts were interested in art, as Freud early in his writing included allusions to art and frequently addressed art and creativity. Strachey listed 22 papers in which Freud dealt directly or indirectly with artists and art, mainly related to literature, poetry, exception for Leonardo's work, and related general problems of artistic creativity. Specifically towards music, Freud was scarce and at some point expressed his little interest in music in general, although here and there he mentioned some important compositions like Mozart's Don Giovanni and Wagner's Tristan. Maybe it was impossible for someone of such a high cultural rank in Vienna at that time to be oblivious of the great composers and some of their masterpieces. In the bulletin of the Anna Freud Center, 1984, there is a dialogue that may throw some light on this fact. Dr. Liebel noticed that Freud had been unable to approach music because he could not understand things that he could not touch and examine, as one can a statue or a picture. Dr. Speller thought that this has something to do with the fact that Freud's sister, Anna, was made to get rid of her piano because her playing disturbed Freud's studies, and he had protested. Psychoanalysis and psychoanalysts' main interest concentrates in the unconscious and its expressions through the various modes at human disposition. But somewhat neglects the enormous influence and importance of conscious cognitive aspects of artistic creativity, be it related to the producing or interpreting a musical piece. From Strachey, we know that Freud intended to write 7 other papers beside the 5 published papers on metapsychology known today, but either he did not do it at the time, or he did not consider them, if he did write them, good enough or ready to be published, and apparently destroyed them, as would have happened with the project for a scientific psychology for neurologists some years before. Wouldn't it have been found in a forgotten drawer? This was the case of a paper on consciousness, maybe a kind of counterpoint to his paper on the unconscious. Unfortunately, this paper on consciousness is still lacking to help us better understand these complex issues of art and artistic creation, in particular concerning music. Now, do the muses arrive from the depths of the mind, invade, induce, and take possession of the creative arts? Is the artistic creation some kind of entirely spontaneous, magical, or demoniacal force that erupts in the artist's mind in the manner of a volcano that has an irresistible pressure to spit out what lies beneath? I believe that every act, be physical or mental, creative especially, can be traced back to the major force that governs life in all its expressions and modes, from viruses to Homo sapiens, namely to what